So what you have here are mouth-blown glass windows. So they're technically the terminology shifts depending on who uses it. This would be considered a stained glass window, but when we create windows, there's this popular misconception that we're adding color to the glass. The glass itself is mouth-blown glass, mostly silica, sand, but in order to produce color, when they're heating up that sand with other kind of additives and fluxes, they'll throw certain metals into that vat of molten silica. And depending on what metal you use, it produces a different color. So your blues, they will throw in cobalt into that silica mixture, and when the sunlight travels through that metal, it will trap all other wavelengths of light save one. So cobalt only allows a blue wavelength to come through, which is also why if you put your hand up to a window after it's been in the sunlight for a while, it's remarkably hot. Why? It's because it's absorbing all the wavelengths of light except for one. The glass here that you have in your church is the nicest glass made in the world. It's called mouth-blown glass. It's different than rolled glass, which is made by machines. All of this glass, or at least 80% of it, there's a little bit that is American-made, but almost all of this is made in Germany, France, and Poland. Because that process of blowing the glass is so time-consuming, the per square foot cost of this glass before we do anything to it is already $30 a square foot, and that's just to get it to us. Now you add on top of that all the things we do in cutting it down, painting, or firing metal oxides into it, and your cheapest windows today that we produce are usually around $400 a square foot. A lot of what we're doing is around $2,000 a square foot. And if I had brought a PowerPoint presentation, I could go through all the steps and you would understand that cost pretty quickly. The charming thing about this glass is the variety of textures, the crystalline nature, so you can still see the outside world, but it's almost transformed by the texture of the glass. This is, I think, one of the more unknown facts about it is that the mouth-blown glass is still a window. Rolled glass, which was used a lot by Tiffany and Lafarge, the more opalescent glass, it's more akin to a lit wall painting where you don't really have a great recognition of the exterior environment. And it is this same type of glass that has been used, it's been blown this way since probably the 1200s. So really nothing has changed. In fact, my father likes to tell people that when if we brought someone from the 15th century in around a day and a half, they would be completely at home in our studio. So it is not something that, it's a craft that's remained largely unchanged. The painting in this window is actually, it's at root kind of this finely shaved rust, a metal oxide. We don't use anything organic when we paint with glass because after a while the power of the sun will break it down. And this is the problem that Tiffany faced when he was doing his windows. He was using organic paints. That's why if you go to most of his works, the faces and the limbs, really the only parts of the windows he would paint, they're all almost gone. So we use inert materials, and we mix it with water to make it soluble, acacia gum to make it temporarily stick to the glass, and then we put it into a kiln, fire it at around 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point the glass just starts to melt, and the metals will then sink down into the surface of the glass, and as the glass cools, those metals are trapped into the glass, which means it's, when fired correctly, it's there forever. So the oldest windows, existing windows, are dating back to 1060 in Augsburg, Germany. So original paint on those, original firing, when done correctly, it is one of the most permanent surfaces in a church. The initial cost for stained glass is high, but over time, it becomes probably your cheapest surface. I would say maybe once every 70 to 100 years, you have to look at it. Whereas with drywall, painting, tuck pointing, plumbing, it seems like every 25 to 30 years. So a variety of things. The artist who did this window was Francis Deck. He started working for our studio, I believe in 1934, 1935. He did his last commission in 1999. This is kind of a hallmark of everyone who works at our studio. It's your last job. The cutter that trained my dad worked at the studio till he was 96. Not because he had to, but because he enjoyed it. My grandfather was still designing windows after he even lost his vision in his left eye. And actually, his artwork after that was just as good. Beethoven went deaf. An artist can go partially blind and still do his thing. Over time, windows do need repair, or do need some kind of maintenance. The stained glass along your nave here, I was just walking up, most of it is just in great shape. What really hurts glass windows is when the framing around it is not solid anymore. So on the exterior, there's sealants called oil-based putties. Those oil-based putties were originally put there to help just frame out the glass, but also to prevent any kind of water penetration. Now, those oil-based putties were always designed to be replaced probably every 30 years. In our experience, that never happens. So I would say these are probably original oil-based putties from the time that this church was made. Long overdue. Unfortunately, the only great way to do it is sweat and a little bit of arm power. We take a hammer and a chisel to those oil-based putties, make sure that the surfaces are clean, and then go around with a neutral cure silicone, which is flexible. This is a very lovely piece, Eucharistic window. You've got the Chi-Rho forming the center, and then the wheat imagery, and then the grapes, the stylized grapes, hanging down from it. And then just looking down the nave here, I only saw a couple things from in the back I thought was really lovely. You have the scene of the Nativity simply right next to the young man in the back working the audiovisual. A creche with 3 staffs representing the shepherds. And this is usually, the lily is a scene of the Annunciations. So I'm imagining this is kind of a life of Christ on this side. And I didn't really get a chance to study this side yet. But the simplicity of imagery is another thing that I really liked during this time frame. Because it makes you think. Like I have to enter into that image and say, what's going on here? Whereas with a lot of the style that preceded this era, it was more or less just a figure or a scene, a scriptural scene, which tends to be a little bit more didactic. You see it, you understand it. And then you stop paying as close attention to it. But with symbolism in general, you have to figure it out. It's something you can contemplate. So we've been using that since roughly 1990. Preceding that was a polyurethane called Volcom. And the silicone, on our earliest projects, we go back and check. It's as good today as it was when we put it on. And so you can have, it comes in a variety of colors. You can custom make it, but it makes it more expensive. But they have 40 different options for the colors. And it's, just to give you some assurance, so it's a Dow Corning product that NASA uses on their reentry space vehicles. Okay, that's a great question. So there is a big difference. Stained glass, excuse me, is a transmitted light medium. Every other light or art medium is reflected light. Light bounces off a surface, hits you back in the eye. With stained glass, you always want an imbalance of light. You want the brighter side on the exterior, viewing it from the darker side, the interior, which is why if you ever travel to Europe and go to some of these great medieval Gothic cathedrals, one of the most impressive things is how dark it is on the inside. It makes it really, the windows shine all the more. To make this from start to finish, so designing it, going through the approval process, cutting it, firing it, or painting it, firing it, glazing it, waterproofing it, adding reinforcing bars, because you'll see some reinforcing bars across the window. This window itself would probably take 6 months. All right, so it's not a quick process. I didn't mention the steel reinforcing bars principally because there's really not any on your nave. It's also a little bit more affordable because you have a lot of square footage here. Because they weren't using lead and many little pieces, it allowed something very beautiful just in the basic glass itself to be installed. Otherwise, you'd be getting kind of a catalog. I don't want to use the word kitschy, but something like that. Whereas, like just the material beauty alone of this is nicer than a lot of that more catalog kind of art. Every design we do is for one church. Like we don't repeat our designs, and that's because every church is different. Either if not in their architecture, at least in their community or the way they worship. So everything is taken into account in that regard.